guys, it's Angelina and Dima here from Walking Nature World. Today we start new trail in Italy that will go along via Francigena. We'll follow it for some time because we want to explore more Italy, and we'll start with this trail.
We just finished our Tour de Mont Blanc hike and already spent a few days here in Italy, but we definitely want to stay. And we saw on the trail map that here passes the Via Francigena trail actually. That is a very long pilgrim trail, kind of alternative to the Camino in Spain, but in Italy it's Via Francigena that goes through all the France, crosses Alps, Switzerland, and then it also crosses Italy and arrives to Rome. And we're planning to do just the parts of it, to show you the most interesting sites, most beautiful natural places as always. So now, as we said, we start in Aosta Valley and want to continue until the Mediterranean Sea coast, where it joins the coast. Then we'll probably continue Via Francigena in Tuscany, Italy, because it's also very beautiful. There will be lots of medieval villages, towns, and it should be interesting.
So let's begin this exciting adventure.
Let's go! Our first day of Via Francigena started quite late at 11 AM in the morning. We planned for the day to do around 20 kilometers from town Quart in Aosta to Châtillon. It was expected to be very sunny and hot right from the start, and it came true during the day. The trail was going quite flat all the first part, just passing through the villages and little towns. There were still a lot of big snow-capped mountains around us, and the landscapes were quite dramatic. Most of the trail was going quite easy, mostly on the pavement routes and sometimes on the dirt farm roads. The marking was quite good, only at first we lost the trail, but then luckily found it. Along the way we saw lots of vineyards here and there, as well as many gardens with lots of fruit growing in them. Surprisingly enough, we didn't meet any pilgrims or backpackers at all that day. Closer to the end of the day, the path started to go up and down more and swirl along the hills. In the end, we headed to the camping site that was in 2 kilometers more from Châtillon in village San Vicente. We woke up at the campsite that we found yesterday and we had it all to ourselves. The start of the day was sunny and warm, and the air was more fresh and cool after the night's rain, and it felt great. All the first part of the trail was going nicely through the deep shadowed forest paths, and we enjoyed it quite a lot. We were getting through a lot of wild cherry trees and fruit gardens full of nectarines and apricots that were very tempting to try. Suddenly we came across a cycling couple that were doing the Via Francigena by bike. It was our first meeting with real pilgrims on the way. The trail was swirling between the fields and little villages with the rocky rooftops. The mountains were still all around us, giving us a beautiful scenery to look at. The second day around, we were seeing lots of old castles on top of the hills. It definitely made the trail more special to walk. So we made 18 kilometers and got to the town Varese. We knew that we were going to wild camp because there were no campsites around. Luckily we found a spot quite easily, very close to the trail in the little forest. We had a very quiet and calm night in the secluded forest place that we found yesterday. For the first part of the day we were walking along the fields and mostly on pavement car roads with no shadow. passed through the village of Arnat, crossed the old river bridge, and the most boring part of the trail started. It was on the car roads and along the fields close to the highway. Already from a distance we saw a big castle, Forte di Bard, situated on top of the hill. It was located on different levels and looked very massive. We went through the village Bard and then met the steepest downhill of the day. After walking along the side of a rocky mountain, we got out to the old Roman route, part of which was conserved in its original state. It looked impressive with the huge rocks that was making a brick road and the cut part of the rock on the side. Then we decided to take a shortcut route to the campsite where we planned to stop that night. We did somewhat around 20 kilometers for that day when we got to the campsite in the end. That day we started our hike at the town Alto Pascio in Tuscany after skipping some part of the trail and doing the Cinque Terre hike in between. We planned to get to the next town Fucecchio, which was in 17 kilometers. The first few kilometers of official Via Francigena trail were going on the Fasca road, which seemed almost a highway. Then the trail turned away from traffic and we appeared to be on a quiet and green forest path. We even have spotted a baby hare there. The next part was around 8 kilometers long and was a bit boring, going very straight along the young pine trees. We passed by the village Ponte a Capiano, where was located an old bridge over the river that served as a fortress at one time as well. From that point we started to see the typical Tuscany landscape, with the green hills and big masons on top of them, cypress trees and yellow fields around them. The trail continued going along the river, very straight and easy. So we got to the town Fucecchio, which was quite a big village with a huge hypermarket in it. There were no campsites around, so we knew we were going to wild camp that night. That night we had a really bad sleep and we were feeling broken apart right from the start of the day. The trail was quite boring, all the first part going along the Fasca roads, and it was all in the direct sunlight between the fields. We passed through little villages and houses and saw that there is a big supermarket in front of us. We bought there as always the focaccia and some ice cream to have a good snack. We did quite a bit of uphill in order to get to the village San Gimignano, which was located right on the hill and had some old fortress and towers at the side of it. So we did another 9 or 10 kilometers on the car roads without having many exciting views on the way. And we were feeling just an extreme heat striking our heads. Only at the end of the day the trail turned away from the car road on a dirt gravel road. After a short time we found a camp spot on the field on the side of the road, close to the little forest. That day we planned to do 17 kilometers to the next major village, Terme. The trail from the start was passing through the little forest and the fields and had quite a lot of shadow. Major agriculture grown in these places were the olive trees and vineyards, so they were dominating the landscape together with the malt fields of a bright yellow color. Among the fields were located many farmsteads or manor houses that were called hamlets. On the way we met quite a lot of signs with directions of Via Francigena and others, and we noticed that they became better and appeared more often than the days before. Also met that day the most amount of pilgrims, 3 hikers and 5 cyclists. The difficulty of the trail wasn't challenging at all, but as the sun was getting higher, it made it more difficult to walk. We can consider that day first authentic day of the Toscana Trail, when we had the joy to walk on the calm dirt roads, away from the traffic, and enjoy the typical landscapes. In the end, we had to walk along Via Francigena around 3 kilometers more to find a camp spot on the malt field near the forest. We had another quiet night in the Tuscany fields between the vineyards. It was going to be a shorter day because we wanted to stop at the nearest campsite in 15 kilometers. The sun was striking our heads starting from the early morning. Overall, we saw that the relief started to be more hilly. All day long we continued to enjoy the views of the beautiful Toscana fields with plenty of vineyards and olive trees and cute houses on top of the hills. First part of the trail was going mostly uphill and was on a quiet dirt car road. But the second half it started to go on a pavement car road again with little to no shadow. When we were getting closer to San Gimignano, we saw the unusual picture of the old village. It was all sandy colors made of rock and had several high towers around it. When we got closer, we realized that it was a fortified medieval town with the rock walls surrounding all the village. It turned out to be one of the best conserved medieval towns in the whole Italy and maybe even Europe. The campsite was situated in 2 kilometers from the town and it was all downhill, so fortunately it was easy to get to. We met another sunny morning in Tuscany, this time at the campsite Bocetto di Piema. We liked the location of the campsite and the view from it right on the town San Gimignano. The first several kilometers were going through the vineyards and little farmhouses and was climbing mostly uphill. There were quite a lot of crossroads on the way, and at one moment we wandered away from official Via Francigena, but fortunately not too far. After some kilometers of walking in the sun, the forest path started, and we've been on it almost all day long. And it felt great and very special too, because it happens so rarely nowadays to find authentic forest paths. The amount of the oak trees was astonishing there, and by how big and high they were, we could assume that they were at least 150 years old. All day long the trail was going in the forest paths and just sometimes was coming out to the fields. We started to see some sunflower fields that day apart from the olive trees and vineyards. After we crossed the village Quartaya, it was already about time to start searching for the camp spot. That night we didn't sleep very well because of some deer coming to visit us at night and the sounds they were making. The first part was going through the beautiful oak forest again, and we have been enjoying it thoroughly. The temperature was getting close to 37 degrees Celsius that day, and unfortunately, after we walked out of the town Graciano de Elsa, the trail started to go more in the sun and through the open fields that was killingly hot. We suffered again from the lack of water sources on the trail. This way we got to the Abbadia Sola, that was an old monastery with small rocky buildings and streets. Then we had to conquer quite a steep and rocky uphill to the Castle de Monteriggioni. This place actually was an old castle that had a rock wall around it, and everything was in quite a good condition. It had a small village inside of it consisting of 2 streets, 1 square and a church. When we went out of the village and walked a bit more uphill, we found a surprisingly flat spot on the middle between the trees, which wasn't seen from the road, so we decided to camp there. The morning started very early for us, at 5:30 am, because we wanted to hike the most of the distance as early as possible. The sun was already up and shining strong when we got out on the trail at 7 am. During the first part of the trail we enjoyed the shadowy forest path and views over the old castles. Then, after a nice but really short part in the forest and shadow, we had to get out on the car road again. Then the trail turned away from the car road and started to go closer to the forest, which felt like a relief after a long sunny part. It was going mostly flat with some gentle uphills and downhills. Coming closer to the city Siena, the trail was climbing uphill and all of it was on the car roads. Inside, Siena seemed to us quite a dark and gloomy city with the black facades and old narrow streets and buildings. So we crossed the main streets of it and visited the central square, which was full of sun. Then we had to take the bus to the campsite, which was in 30 kilometers from the town. We wanted to find some secluded spot to stay in for a couple of days and recover our powers to continue the trail. On the day 11 of our Francigena hike, We were back on the trail after a 4-day rest in the campsite. The first several kilometers we were going up and down a bit and in the shadow all the way to locality Cinciano. That day we've seen a lot of yellow, clear fields with mowed grass and no grapes or olive trees on it. There were still a lot of typical landscapes of the endless hills, cypress trees on the side of the roads leading to the big houses on top of the hills. Most of the day we hiked through the routes along the fields with almost no shadow. We passed along a lot of sunflower fields as well that day, and they were very pretty. The combination of blue skies, green hills and yellow flowers was a perfect one. Also, we walked along the railway for quite a few kilometers, which was all straight route through the fields. This way we got to the first village, Ponte d'Arabia, and then we walked a little bit more along the railway and finally came to our destination village, Buonconvento. It was an old village surrounded by the bricked walls with really old wooden gates. So we did our shopping there and then got back on Via Francigena, hoping that a bit further in the fields we would find a nice camp spot. The next day we started a bit late, only at 9 AM, and after we had our breakfast we got out on the trail. The sun was hitting us really strong even in the morning. We planned to do around 11 kilometers to the village Torinieri, and we saw on the map that we had to tackle a long uphill for the day. There was little to no shadow at all during the whole day, and the heat was absolutely killing us. The landscapes continued to be similar to the previous days, but this time with plenty of vineyards all over the hills. They were stretching as far as the eye could see, and we could only imagine how big the harvest would be. Our only concern about the trail was not having enough shadow and forest. There were only 4.5 kilometers left to the village Torinieri, and was the most exhaustive part, where we felt like we did double the distance because of such strong sunlight. At the entrance of the village we took a bus to San Gimignano to skip the car road part, and there we went out to search for the camp spot. We woke up to another sunny morning in the fields of Tuscany, close to the village Gimignano. All that day long the route was going through the dirt, gravel car roads. First part of the trail was going in quite a lot of shadow and all downhill, so it was easy and quick to do. In such way we walked through little village Vignone Alto and then to Bagno Vignoni. There we saw a reservoir of water in the middle of the square, which looked like an old version of the swimming pool and turned out to be the old thermal baths. Then from Bagno Vignoni we had to do the biggest uphill of the day, all the way to the village on the top of the hill Castiglione d'Orcia. That uphill was just 3 kilometers, but wasn't an easy part to do, as the sun was already high up on the sky and there wasn't any shadow on the trail. Castiglione d'Orcia was another old village with some half-destroyed castle and fortified walls at the very top of the hill. So after having the snack we were back on the trail again to do the last 7 kilometers for the day. It was mostly downhill with some gentle uphill in the middle. Behind the camp spot we almost got to the aqua salsa, where we had to go down in the fields again and search for quite a while. That day we had the first rainy morning in the whole hike. Our plan was quite big that day, to do 17 kilometers of a constant uphill to the village Radicofani. It was going to be one of the longest and most challenging days on the hike. We met the most amount of pilgrims that day, probably around 10, when normally we met 1 or 2 people only. And we noticed this tendency that the closer we got to Rome, the more people we met. The first part of the trail was surprisingly going mostly downhill. Then we got down to the little clear river and walked some time alongside of it. The trail was constantly going uphill but quite gently, and the last 6 kilometers we had to conquer 350 meters of an uphill. At one point we started to get some panoramic views over the surrounding fields and hills, and also the view of the old towers and castle of the village Radicofani. The last few kilometers of the trail were the most picturesque. It was going mostly on the rocky bricked old pilgrim way, and we had the constant views of the village towers in front of us. We walked through the village Radicofani, and then only in about a kilometer or so we were able to find a nice spot in between the fields. We fell asleep almost right away because we were quite exhausted by this full of impressions day. Hiking via Francigena was an amazing journey. We hiked through all the province of Tuscany and made around 120 kilometers in total. We enjoyed a lot walking through the old forest path, meeting some wildlife on the way, and discovering historical castles and little towns. Of course, the hot weather was exhausting us a lot and made it more difficult, but we enjoyed it anyway. We realized that Italy is a beautiful country that deserves more time to be explored.